From Tallahassee, Florida's capital city, North Florida Baptist Church presents the Family Bible Hour.
Jesus, friend of sinners, we have strayed so far away. We cut down people in your name. That sword was never ours to swing. Jesus, friend of sinners, the truth's become so hard to see. The world is on their way to you, but they're tripping over me. Always looking around, never looking up. I'm so double-minded. A plain-eyed saint with dirty hands and a heart divided. Oh, Jesus, friend of sinners, open our eyes to the world at the end of our pointing fingers. Let our hearts be led by mercy. Help us reach with open hearts and open doors. Oh, Jesus, friend of sinners, break our hearts for what breaks yours.
Jesus, friend of sinners, the one who's writing in the sand. May the righteous turn away and the stones fall from their hand. Help us to remember we are all the least of these. Let the memory of your mercy bring your people to their knees. Nobody knows what we're for, only what we're against when we judge the wounded. What if we put down our signs, cross over the lines, and love like you did? Oh, Jesus, friend of sinners, open our eyes to the world at the end of our pointing fingers. Let our hearts be led by mercy. Help us reach with open hearts and open doors. Oh, Jesus, friend of sinners, break our hearts for what breaks yours. You love every lost cause. You reach for the outcast. Oh, the leper and the lame, they're the reason that you came. Lord, I was that lost cause, and I was the outcast. You died for sinners just like me, a grateful leper at your feet. 'Cause you are good, you are good, and your love endures forever. You are good, oh, you are good, and your love endures forever. You are good, Lord, you are good, and your love endures forever. Yes, you are good. You are good. You are good. You
Thank you so much, Larry and Kara. That's, if I didn't miss that, that was a Casting Crowns song. And, this is a good illustration of music that is coming through today, that just the message of the music is so very powerful. One of the reasons that we ask our soloists and special groups to try and put the words onto the screen is so that if it's a song that's a little bit newer to you, you'll be able to get the message of the song. And boy, did I ever get the message of that song. And thank you so much for doing such a great job today, Larry, Martin, and Kara Wynn. Will you take your Bibles and turn to Joshua in chapter 24? We're going to look at verse 15. The title of the study today in parenting is Control Issues. This is message number 6 in a parenting series that we are doing this summer. And we're talking about control issues today. A man bought a hunting dog. He was eager to see how the dog would perform, so he took him out hoping to track down something really big. No sooner had they gotten into the woods than the animal picked up the trail of a bear. Excitedly, the hunter followed close behind. Then suddenly the dog stopped, sniffed the ground, and headed in a different direction. He had caught the smell of a deer that had crossed the path of a bear. A few moments later, he stopped again, and this time he was captivated by the scent of a rabbit that had crossed the path of the deer. And so on it went until finally the hunter was just breathless and found the dog barking down the hole of a field mouse. That's a pretty simple illustration, but it's a very powerful illustration of the importance of resolve. Resolve is one of the most important ingredients in life, and that includes parenting. Here is a wonderful verse of resolve that certainly applies to parenting. Joshua 24 and verse 15. You're very familiar with it. And if it is evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your fathers served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. That's resolve. That is absolute resolve on the part of Joshua for he and his family to serve God. Louis Pasteur, whose discoveries revolutionized chemistry and agriculture and industry and medicine and surgery and hygiene and so much more, credited his success to resolve. Here's what he said: "Let me tell you the secret that has led me to my goal. My strength lies solely in my tenacity." That's what Louis Pasteur said. Billy Sunday said, "More men fail through lack of purpose than lack of talent." This is certainly true in parenting. We have to admire the resolve of Joshua in stating the purpose for he and his family, and not only stating it, but then following through with it. Too many parents do not have a good handle on what they should be themselves, much less the direction that they should go with their families, and sometimes that causes them to fail in their resolve. If you're one of those people who looks at other families and makes statements like this, "I wish my children acted like that," or if you say, "When I'm a parent, I hope my children are like their children," you should know something. The condition and behavior of other people's children has little to do, nothing to do, but little to do with genetics, nothing to do with luck, and much to do with how children are trained. The beginning of training is gaining control. It's a control issue. It is always a control issue. You cannot teach a class if you cannot control a class. There are a lot of wonderful teachers who have a lot of knowledge that they would love to be able to impart, but they can't impart it because they can't get the class under control. You have to be able to control before you can teach. We'll have we have the children and will have the children, if you are not already parents, that God intends for you to have. Your children will not come to you accidentally and say, how did this child get to me? Your child will come to you on purpose, and God will, will help give you the child that He wants you to have. Our children will have the parents that God intended for them to have. The success we enjoy with our children is not dependent on having the right children, but dependent on carrying out the plan that God has for building a home. In training your children, there is a logical beginning point that a lot of parents overlook. Here's the beginning point. You've got to know what you want. You've got to know it. When that child, even before that child comes, you must know what you want in the training of that child. We have to set goals. Much of life is about goals. If we don't set them, we won't know where we are going when we have arrived, or we will not stay on course at all if we don't set our goals. Raising a family is not the place to forget your goals. A lot of times people set goals and they forget them. Raising a family is not the time or place to do that kind of thing. Setting goals in parenting gives you the opportunity to see a plan unfold. And hopefully that plan is rooted in the Word of God and is guided by the Holy Spirit as you parent your children. When I first went to college, I had little direction as to what I should do about my major or do with my life. I was only the second one in my extended family to go to college. Not only had none of my brothers and sisters other than one gone, but aunts, uncles, cousins, and so on. Just wasn't a college family, and to that point had not been a college family. Since then, pretty much are college families, but back then just weren't college people. And so when I went to college, I had little direction. My father had not said, okay, son, you know, your family's always been in law, and so you're going to follow law or medicine or whatever it may be. And so I just went to college and you know, and didn't really know what I was going to do in college. And as time went on, I came to realize that probably business administration was the best path for me. And so I chose a bachelor's degree in business administration, and as I began to develop in business administration, there were a lot of directions to go, and I realized that I didn't want to go in the direction of accounting. That took too much concentration, and so I didn't want to go in that direction, and I didn't want to go in certain other directions. And I realized that probably marketing was the main area of business that I wanted to study. So I got a bachelor's degree in business administration leaning toward marketing. And as I moved toward that goal, here's what happened. I began to plan every course toward the goal that I was taking. Every course was planned in direction of that goal. At first, there were general courses that could be planned for any goal. But as I, as I began to hone in on the course that God had for me, then that I had chosen, I realized that this was the courses that I needed to take, and so I began to take certain courses. Shortly after achieving that goal, it was the goal of marriage. Jan and I were engaged to be married, and there was the goal of marriage. And then the goal of ministry, and with the call to preach came a goal for more training and seminary training, and then become a pastor, and later starting a church in Nashville, Tennessee, and on it goes. My life and all of our lives probably, or should have been, set by certain goals. When it came time for children, Jan and I continue to set goals as part of the process of our life, and certainly as the process of parenting. We had goals and still have goals for our children. In parenting, the first goal, one of the first goals, not maybe the very first goal, but one of the first goals is control. You want to have control. If not all other, if you don't have control, all other goals are unlikely to be met. You just won't have them. Here's a sobering reality. The older the child gets without being brought under control, the more difficult it is to accomplish, and the less likely we are to ever achieve it. If you want to get control of your child as early as you possibly can. There are a lot of parents of adults out there who would like to say amen to this, but it's a very painful thing to say amen to if there are control or have been control issues in the past. A 2-year-old is much easier to control than a 12-year-old. If you decide, I'm going to work on controlling my 2-year-old, and you do it then it's an easier job than waiting until they're 12 years old. You say, Pastor Ray, I have a 2-year-old. 2-year-olds are impossible. Oh, I understand. They really are impossible. I had someone tell me one day that a 3-year-old was a 2-year-old with a year's experience. And, and that's probably true, and it continues on and on. But I'm here to tell you that the longer you wait, the more difficult it is. Now, there's 3 considerations in the matter of controlling our children. What does it mean to control our child? Well, first of all, it means to have the power to direct your child. Go here, not there. Eat this, not that. Do this, not that. And so forth and so on. The ability to use the appropriate force necessary to cause our children to obey instructions and directions that we give. As parents, we have the right to give directives to our children. You will go to bed. You will go to sleep. Now, that was early on. You have the right to give that directive. And let me tell you this. You knew that when the child was born. When that little baby was born, you knew that you were going to have to establish some sleep patterns. And you're going to have to work to try and establish. And you used certain things to establish sleep patterns because you wanted to direct that child. You want to direct that child to sleep at the same time that you wanted to sleep. Because if they didn't, then you would never sleep, and the child, it would be a very difficult thing. So you needed to have the power to direct your child. Now, in order to have the power to direct your child, gaining control means that you must have power to restrain your child. This is the action of using the needed pressure to hold our children back from their own desires and actions, to restrain them from what they would naturally like to do. Well, my child is naturally good. No, your child is not naturally good. You say, but you don't know my child. No, you don't know your child. Children are not naturally good. Children are little devils. They just are. And they're born with a sin nature, and they cultivate that sin nature. You say, but they're not accountable. No, they reach a time when they're accountable for their sin. You're accountable. Do you know what, in the Jewish religion, you know what a bar mitzvah is? A bar mitzvah is when the father is no longer responsible for the son. That's what the bar mitzvah is. And the thing when the boy says, today I am a man, basically he's saying, I take responsibility. Prior to that, all sins that the child committed in the Jewish religion, all sins were accounted to his father. And today, he becomes a man. He becomes accountable for his own sins. Well, now, I absolutely agree that children are born with a certain innocence, and that they do not become accountable for their sins until a later time in their childhood. But the reality is that, accountable or not, they are born with a sin nature. And you have to restrict your children in order to direct your children. For instance, if you don't want your children watching too much television or the wrong kind of thing on television, then here's an idea. Don't put one in their room. I mean, that's a very simple thing. I just don't know why my children watch all that trash. Well, it's because you put it in their room. And then you went to bed. And they just watched all that trash. Just don't put it in their room. If you want control over what they see on the internet, then put the computer and the internet in the flow of the house. Put it out in the middle of the house. Put it put it in the flow of things. To control our children, we must have the power to restrain. And don't forget that there is a judgment for not restraining our children. At least there was for a man named Eli. 1 Samuel chapter 3 and verse 12. On that day I will fulfill against Eli all that I have spoken concerning his house, from the beginning to the end. And I declare to him that I am about to punish his house forever for the iniquity that he knew, because his sons were blaspheming God. Watch this. And he did not restrain them. So, parents, here's what you should understand. You have and should have the power to direct, and you do that through the power to restrain, and of course you have the power to set boundaries. There is a parental right and responsibility to set boundaries for acceptable and acceptable and unacceptable behavior, and to make it known when the behavior is unacceptable and to correct it. Control, then, is the positive and the negative pressure needed to control our children to obey and follow direction and values. That's what control is. That pressure can be in advance in the form of instruction and warning. You can control them that way. You can say, all right, here's what you need to understand. If you make this choice, if you do this instead of that, here's what's going to happen. Now, you've got to make a decision. Do you want to do the thing that you're not supposed to do, or do you want to do the thing that you're supposed to do? You've got a choice to make. and encourage that child to make that choice. You can do that by way of instruction. You can do it by way of threats if you want to. The other side of that is that it's the you have to punish what they've done that's wrong. So when you're setting boundaries, you can you can go either way with that. You can say, all right, I'm going to work in fact, you ought to go both ways with it. I'm going to work in advance to avoid having to work in arrears on the rear. I'm going to try my best to not have to do this. And could I tell you that no parent that I know, no good parent, I'll put it that way, no good parent enjoys the correcting part of controlling. We just don't like that. We would have much preferred for our children to go in the direction that we set for them ahead of time, rather than having to go back and correct what they did that was wrong. So we set those boundaries for them. And we should understand that children are born without a restraint system. Children always go too far. They always go too far. Don't you remember, those of you who have adult children, don't you, or those of you with children that are not adults, don't you remember sitting back and watching your child do something and thinking to yourself, this is going to get out of hand? Can't you remember that? Can't you remember saying to yourself that maybe they were playing, they were, siblings were slap boxing or, doing whatever they do, and you think to yourself, this is going to get out of hand, somebody's going to get mad. And you watched it, and sure enough, it got out of hand, somebody got mad. That's the way it is. Children have no restraint system. It is up to parents to give them a sense of restraint and control. To control children is to build fences around their lives for their own safety and protection. Look, when my kids were small, we had these things called playpens. Now I think they're called pack and play. Is that what they're called now? Pack and play. You know what a pack and play is? It's a playpen. When they are babies, we put them in playpens. Now, we put them in playpens in order to give them enough freedom to move around and enjoy life, but to do so in safety. And while we go on about our duties, eventually they will outgrow the playpen, but they never outgrow the principle of boundaries. They never do. Their safety and their peace of mind, and for their safety and for our peace of mind, there are boundaries set from the playpen all the way until they leave our daily care. You're doing it for them, and you're doing it for yourself. Good parents try not to leave their toddlers unattended, and they also don't want to leave their teens unfettered. Boundaries are good for our children and for the family in general. Boundaries are not a bad thing. And if you establish them early, then they're known to be a good thing. If you wait until later, then they become an issue. If boundaries are not clearly defined, they leave the child open for danger and destruction, and the parent open for heartbreak or worse. Proverbs 29:15, the rod and reproof give wisdom, but a child left to himself brings shame to his mother. I mentioned something a couple of weeks ago, and I'm going to come back to it. And this is kind of meddling, especially if you have teenagers. You may have already learned that a lot of parents do not set curfews for their teenagers. When your child became a teenager, you began to realize, wow, other parents of teenagers who drive don't set curfews. Maybe I shouldn't set a curfew either. Now listen very carefully. I personally think it's a big mistake not to set a curfew for your teenage child. And the reason that it's a mistake is because it's a control issue. You're saying, I have no boundaries for how long you can be out of sight of my home. I have no boundaries for that. Do not allow your teenage son or daughter to set the time to come home from a date or for being with friends. You set the time, and don't be afraid to set the time. You say, Pastor Ray, that is old-fashioned. Yes, it is. But that's why our country is going to hell. It's because we have left some tried and true biblical old-fashioned ways. I've had on the church sign for about the last month or so a saying up there that says, America was better when we all went to church. You may have seen that. America was better when we did a lot of things differently than we do today. And one is controlling our children. Set the boundaries. Set the boundaries for your children. Set the boundaries on where they can go, who they can hang out with. If you don't know who your children are hanging out with, that's just a big, big mistake. You need to know who they're hanging out with. Hey, Dad, hey, Mom, I'm going over to so-and-so's house. Well, I don't believe I know them. Oh, yeah, you'd like them. Where do they live? Well, they live somewhere, over in, I don't know exactly. Okay, well, you be careful. How can they be careful when you just sent them off into some abyss without boundaries? You have no idea where they're going. You have no idea who they're going with. They're completely out there. Look, they should know what time that they should be in the house at night, and they should know what time is a decent hour to go to bed. And quite honestly, they should know what to eat. You say, preacher, are you serious? Do you think you ought to do that? Well, of course you should do that to children. You know how that when a baby is first born, you go through the milk stage or the breast milk stage and so forth. You go from that, then you go into what we used to call pablum. They call it cereal now. And then you go into all those ungodly strained things. Which, by the way, is a terrible cycle, because it's my understanding that eventually you come back to those ungodly strained things. It's a horrible thought. God gave those children to you, and you should be setting some very clear boundaries in their lives. They will take the boundaries that we set in the formative years to their adult life. And most likely they will live by those boundaries. They may not live exactly, but they may not be in such outer limits that you don't recognize who they are if you set bounds earlier. Do you know what you want? The first thing that we should want is wisdom to love and control our children. Now here's the second thing. Not only should you know what you want, but you should know why you want it. Some of you are thinking, I want this because these kids are driving me crazy. That's why I want to control. That's not enough. That's really not enough. It's not enough to say, I want control of my kids because they're going to drive me to the bad house. That's just not enough. Here's what Joshua's resolve was. And if it is evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your father served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Very clear that Joshua's motivation for the kind of family that he wanted was led by his desire to serve and glorify the Lord. That's why he did it. If we don't know why we have set a certain goal in our lives, then we may not, in fact, we won't have the will to stay the course. Let me give you a personal illustration. When I was a freshman in college, many of my friends were pledging fraternities. One of the fraternities, I would say a really good fraternity on our campus, sent some of the brothers, the regular brothers, to ask me if I wanted to rush and to offer me the opportunity to be in that fraternity. And many of you are in fraternities, and I know that I'm talking to many people who are fraternity guys or sorority ladies. I agreed. I didn't really know why I agreed, but I agreed to join the fraternity. Now, fraternity life was completely foreign to me. It was completely foreign to the way that I was raised. It was completely foreign in every single way. I mean, it was like I was stepping into another country when I stepped inside the fraternity house. Now, I'm not telling you that it was all a bad experience, because I like the guys in the fraternity. I still like the guy. One of the guys who was a brother in the fraternity is now the CEO of a very large restaurant chain in the country, and you would know. If I told you the name of the restaurant, you would know. It's a very fine restaurant. And I enjoyed many aspects. But in that fraternity, I realized, I don't know why I'm here. I was made the president of the pledge class, but I was made the president of the pledge class without understanding my purpose for being in that fraternity. I never had, when I went to college, I didn't set a goal to be in a fraternity. I didn't know anything about fraternities. And while I was there, I said, this is not me. This is not who I am. Why am I here? And so you know what I did? I quit the fraternity. Why did you quit the fraternity? Because I did not know what my purpose was. I didn't know why I was going in that direction. I didn't know why I wanted to be a part of the fraternity. Now, just it was hard for me to stay with the task of being in a fraternity when I didn't know why I was doing it. It's hard to be a parent if we don't know why we are doing it. To give up on your children is just not acceptable. So I want to give you some important considerations, some things you ought to think about as a parent, or if you want to be a parent someday, or whatever it might be. Know these things might help you in setting your goals. First of all, you should know this. Parenting with control is hard. It's not an easy thing. Luke 14:28 says, "For which of you desiring to build a tower does not first sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it?" If Jesus tells us to count the cost of something, then we ought to count the cost. In fact, we ought to count the cost of everything that we do. No one should try to have children because they just think it'd be neat to have a kid around the house. Wouldn't it just be fun to have a baby? Good. It'd be so much fun. Wouldn't it be just sweet? Little baby, little cheeks. Those little cheeks grow up to curse you. It's fun and it's rewarding, but it's difficult. It's very difficult. Let me give you 4 reasons that training children with the goal of control is hard. First of all, it's time consuming. It is very time consuming. Jan and I got married at age 22. We were both 22. She was 21, about to turn 22. Jan and I got married, And we waited for 5 years to have children. And we had 3 sons over the period of, I think 6 years. We had 3 sons. When the last one was walking down the aisle to be married, we were approaching the age of 60. Now get this. The children were born when we were in our late 27 or so. I was 27. She was 26, I think. And we're both approaching the age of 60 when the last child walks down the aisle to get married. Now, I want to tell you something. Parenting wasn't something that we did in our spare time. It was full time all of those years. If you plan to parent right, you're going to have to give it a lot of time. The old saying is, time and tide wait for no man. This is one of the reasons that raising children is so time consuming. The opportunity that we have today will transition tomorrow. You will not have the exact same opportunity tomorrow that you have today. It is an unending path toward independent living, and every day that they live opens a new opportunity. I was looking last night at some pictures of my grandson Bradford on his 4th birthday. Now, Bradford will be 5 in September. And I cannot tell you how he has changed from his 4th birthday until now. It's shocking for me. It's a shocking thing to see how much he's changed. You have to make time for training children and make good use of the time that God has given you, because that time is always on the move. How many of you have adult children? Raise your hand. You have adult children. Do you not look back and say, where did all that go? Where did that time go? Where did that go? Look, I can remember specific points in my children, my son's early life, specific points in time that literally seem like yesterday. Where did that stuff go? How did this happen? Ephesians 5:15 says, look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise but as wise, making the best use of the time, because the days are evil. It is time consuming to raise children. Time consuming. Here's the second thing. It can be disheartening. When you are in a position of controlling someone, there's going to be conflict. And no one likes conflict. Someone said, where there's a will, there's a won't. That's the truth. Visitors to a zoo were amazed to find this cage that was titled Peaceful Coexistence. And it had a fox and 4 chickens. And they watched and they were in amazement. And the zookeeper explained that it was easy to maintain that arrangement because all they did was occasionally toss a few more chickens in. That stuff's going to happen, folks. This is how some parents try to control without conflict. Well, I'll just toss a few more benefits in and the conflict will go away. Yeah, that's right. The conflict will go away until those benefits are eaten up, and then there are more. Eventually, that is far more disheartening than just facing the conflict at the appropriate time. Here's the third thing. It is disrupting. Parenting with control can disrupt your life. If we will control our children, we have to be ready to do so when the need arises. This means that plans are sometimes interrupted, and there can be embarrassment associated with this. Your children ever act up in public? You ever been to the grocery store, the restaurant, or whatever, and your children just decide to have a fit and fall back in it? When the child steps out of bounds at the grocery store, really you have to stop shopping, go to the car. You might even have to go home. You have to deal with the problem. When a child isn't doing right in church, fix it. Just fix it. It will disrupt some, but not as much as it will later if you don't gain control. You've got to gain control, even if it's disrupting. Now, we have children's church and a great children's program and so on, but I'm going to admit something to you. We brought our children into church with us very early. Very early. In fact, as soon as they could talk and tell what was going on at home, they were in big church. We didn't want them telling about how awful Mama was around the house. They came to big church. And they sat in big church. You said, didn't they disrupt? A couple of times they did. But after that, they didn't disrupt. You say, wasn't that too much? Well, it really wasn't too much. We've just pampered and pampered and pampered and pampered until we think that normal control of children is too much control of children. No one ever said that controlling children is easy. It's hard. And here's the other thing. It's a sacrifice. Controlling children is to consider their good over our own. The long-term motivation of love will enable us to see beyond the time factor, the disappointments, and the disruption. It takes a lot of motivation to see beyond the temporary satisfaction of peace and quiet for now to the day that the child will be on his own or her own. You have to see beyond it. It's a lot easier just to say, okay, throw another chicken in. It's a lot easier to throw another chicken in than to stop and say, wait just a minute. One of these days, this child is going to be out on his or her own, and where will the boundaries be then? And who will be controlling then? There has to be some compass that's put inside that child. And that compass is put inside that child by good parenting. So, parenting with control is hard. Here's the second thing. Parenting with control can seem risky. And I've got to hurry here. But there are several reasons parents get nervous over the idea of taking charge of their child's life. Here's the first one. They're afraid that they'll give the wrong instruction. If you believe that God has called you to be a perfect parent, then you ought to be afraid to give instruction. But God didn't call you to be a perfect parent. If you understand that your efforts and intentions are of interest to God, then perhaps over performance, and you appreciate the grace of God, you can parent without fear. A lot of parents are frozen because they think, I'm going to make the wrong decision. Let me help you with something. You're going to make the wrong decision. That's going to happen. That is a part of parenting, is making the wrong decision. The reason Michael Jackson made so many points, Michael Jordan, Michael Jackson, whoo. I don't know where that came from. The reason Michael Jordan made so many points in his career was because he missed so many shots in his career. He took a lot more shots than he made. He missed a lot more than he made. You're going to make some mistakes. But you understand that God is looking on your heart. 1 Samuel 16:7, for the Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. We're going to make mistakes, but God is more apt to judge us for a wrong heart than poor judgment. And here's the second thing. People are sometimes hesitant because of guilt over personal sin. It's easy to withhold correction and instruction because of our own shortcomings. You say, well, I hate to correct my child in this because I have this problem in my own life. The answer to that is to correct it in your own life. That's the answer to that. It's very simple. Third thing is fear of rejection. A child by nature loves himself, but biblical training can break selfishness and give them freedom to love their parents. You say, I'm afraid to restrict or control my child because I'm afraid that my child won't love me. Your child will love you more, will have the freedom to love you more if they can see the pattern that needs to be broken in just loving themselves only. And children are made to love themselves only. They're made to want their own way. They're made to think that they're entitled to their own way. So we're looking at control issues today. You got to know what you want. And what you really ought to want is some kind of control. And you need to know why you want it. Now here's the final thing. You got to know when to start. Start controlling your child as early as possible. Now I'm going to be real careful here because this is where you don't want to get the wrong message. Just as your infant develops quickly through the stages of holding its head up and rolling over and sitting up and so forth, they're also going to be developing in their will. As early as possible, you want your child to respond to you. This has both positive and negative application. Train them in what the word no means. Train them in that. Train them lovingly, train them clearly, but train them in what no means. No is a very important word. Now, I know there's some person out there that's going to be on the Today Show that say, you should never say no to your children. But that person also, goes to visit their children on the weekend at Folsom. They're good parents that have children that have issues, and I'm not being unkind there. Look, at first they'll respond to the word, the tone of the word. They haven't heard it before. A child is pitching their fit. No. Oh, what's that? That doesn't sound like. What is that no thing? No. Wow. You know this thing where you put them to bed and they do their head up like this? Lay your head down. And come back up like this. Lay your head down. They come back up like this. You know what that child is doing? Looking to get out of bounds. I'm serious. You said no. Yes. Yes. It is just a blink from that to spitting peas in your face. It's just a blink from that. I'm not saying to be mean, unkind, harsh, etc., but I'm saying this, that you're going to have to create an understanding of the word no and then expand on that to come to mommy, come to daddy. You're going to have to expand on those things, but it begins with control. Look, Joshua knew what he wanted for his family. I don't know the rest of the story of Joshua, but I do know this. God allowed his resolve to be put in Scripture. So I believe Joshua followed through. The question is, will we follow through? I'm at a whole different place with my family now. 3 adult, grown sons still want the same thing that I wanted when they were younger. Still want the exact same thing. Just have a whole different way to follow the resolve now. And good parents never lose their resolve that for them and their house they will serve the Lord. And it begins with control, setting the boundaries.